উপরে আলাদা করেছিস এগুলো ঠিকঠাক নেই
वंदे मातरम वंदे मातरम वंदे मातरम वंदे मातरम वंदे मातरम जय हिंद जय हिंद जय हिंद जय हिंद जय हिंद जय हिंद प्रजातंत्र दिवस की जय प्रजातंत्र दिवस की जय प्रजातंत्र दिवस की जय जमुना गंगा उज्जल जल चितरंग तव शुभ नामे जागे तव शुभ आशीष मागे गाहे तव जय गाथा जन गण मंगल नायक जय हे भारत मात विधाता जय हे जय हे प्रजातंत्र दिवस की जय, प्रजातंत्र दिवस की जय, प्रजातंत्र दिवस की जय, भारत माता की जय, भारत माता की जय, भारत माता की जय, जय हिंद।
Namaskar everyone. As you all know, the reason why we have assembled here in this Vivekananda hall, today is a very pious day. The reason you all know. We are celebrating Azadi ka Amrit Mahotsav to mark the 75th independence. While coming to the institute, I was just gazing on a thought. If we go back, if we look back after 75 years to the years of Indian independence or the revolutionary years, or even before that, would be astonished, will be awestruck to see that maybe somewhere everything was destined or decided. This year, when we stand in the Vivekananda Hall, marking the 75th year of Indian independence, also we are observing the sesquicentennial celebration of Sri Aurobindo's birth. With that, also the birth anniversary of Netaji. We have observed that here in the Vivekananda Hall a few days back on the 23rd of January, we witnessed the release of a grand book, Vivek-Dutite-Udbhashito Shubhash. This year also marks the 200th birth anniversary of Raja Ram Mohan Rai. We have just passed 200th birth anniversary of Vidyasagar. So it seemed that Mother India has a quite well planned incidents that marked the Indian history. I don't know whether you will mark all these things as some divine intervention or the law of nature or what. Bearing all these things in the mind, let us now move towards the program as scheduled today. It has been divided into two parts. On the first session, we'll be having the Vedic chanting, the words of welcome, lecture on Swami Vivekananda and Sri Aurobindo with the concluding of vote of thanks. And on the second session, we'll be having Gaudiya Nritya and also patriotic songs. Without any further delay, may I request Swami Prananathanandaji Maharaj and Swami Tadvratanandaji Maharaj to come and do the Vedic chanting for us.
Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha Harihi Om Aham Rudrebhir Vasubhishcharamyahamaadityairuta Vishwadevaihi Aham Mitra Varuno Bhabibharmyahamindragni Aham Ashmino Bha Aham Somamahanasam Bibharmyaham Tvashtaramutapushanam Bhagam Aham Dadhami Dravinam Habishmate Suprabhye Ye Yajamanaya Sunmate Aham Rashtriya Sangamani Basunang Sikitushi Prathama Yagyanam Tama देवा व्यधदुः पुरुत्रा भूरिस्थात्रां भूर्या वेशयन्तीं मयासो अन्नमत्तियो विपश्यति यः प्राणिति यैं शृणोत्युक्तम् अमन्तभौमान्त उपक्षियन्ति श्रुतिश्रुतश्रद्धिवन्ते वदामि अहमेव स्वयमिदं वदामि जुष्टं देवेभिरुतमानुषेभिः यं कामयेतन्तमुग्रं कृणोमि तं ब्रह्माणं तमृषिं तं सुमेधाम् अहं रुद्राय धनुरातनोमि ब्रह्मद्विषेशरवे हन्तबाहु अहं जनाय समदं कृणोम्यहं द्यावा पृथिवीयाविवेश अहं सुबे पितरमस्य मूर्धन्मम योनि रप्सन्तः समुद्रे ततो वितिष्ठे भुवनानुविश्वोतामुङ्ग्यां वर्ष्मणोपस्पृशामि अहमेव वात इव प्रवाम्यारभमाना भुवनानि विश्वाः परो दिवा पर एना पृथिव्यै तावती महिना सम्बभूव ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः हरिः ॐ तत्सत् श्रीरामकृष्णार्पणमस्तु।
As you all are quite aware that today's program is being held hand in hand with the Ramakrishna Mission Institute of Culture and the Eastern Zonal Cultural Center. So now I would request Srimati Gouri Basu, Director of Eastern Zonal Cultural Center, to come forward and deliver her address of welcome.
Namaskar. On behalf of the Eastern Zonal Cultural Center, I would like to say that we are honored to be a part of today's program with the Ramakrishna Mission Institute of Culture. The program began beautifully with the Vedic Chanting. There is something about Ramakrishna Mission that brings a sense of peace in you, and that is why we keep coming back. As Shayok just said, this year our country is celebrating Azadi ka Amrit Mahotsav, 75 years of independence. The country has come a long way in these 75 years. We are a very ancient civilization, but at the same time a young country, and we still have miles to go. The EZCC has worked quite a bit with the Ramakrishna Mission, maybe a little more at Belur Mott, Sharada Mission. We have worked a little less with the Ramakrishna Mission Institute of Culture, but we do hope that we will get more opportunities to work here. This soil of Bengal has given birth to so many great people. They were all mentioned a little while ago, and this year we are continuing celebrations of Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose. We are continuing the celebrations of Pandit Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar, and of course we are doing the celebrations of Rishi Aurobindo and Raja Ram Mohan Roy. For all this, we will be doing several programs all over the city, and of course at our headquarters in Salt Lake, the Bharatiyam Cultural Multiplex, and at our Shilpogram in Shantiniketan. I would like to extend a warm invitation to everyone to please attend our programs. We have worked with the Ramakrishna Mission Institute of Culture last year when we borrowed the line drawings of Rothin Mitro on Swami Vivekananda's Parikrama, and we held an exhibition of it jointly with them. And it was one of our very successful exhibitions, and every year on Swamiji's birth anniversary, we always hope that Ramakrishna Mission will ask us to do something for them. This evening we have brought for you a presentation of Dashavatar, or the 10 incarnations of Lord Vishnu, in the Gaudiya style, which will be presented by the troupe and students of Dr. Mohua Mukherjee. And of course, patriotic songs, which are so much a part of our 26th January celebrations by the Calcutta Youth Choir. I once again welcome all of you today. I would especially like to thank Swami Suparnananda and apologize to him that I have not been able to be in regular touch with him because I have been traveling a lot and I have not been in the city for a long time. But I hope that everything will go smoothly today, and I'm sure it will, because nothing will go wrong in an institute which is blessed by Sri Sri Ramakrishna. Thank you very much.
Yesterday only, while I was talking with one of my friends about today's program, so he asked me what is the connection between celebrating or having a lecture on Swami Vivekananda and of Sri Aurobindo on the same dais. Is it that we are just concising the program? So I would like to give the answer from the talk of Sri Aurobindo only. From a note in the editors of Nirod Barun's talk with Sri Aurobindo, volume 1, in the page 164, Sri Aurobindo said, "Then there is the incident of the personality of Vivekananda visiting me in jail. He explained to me in detail the work of the supramental, not exactly of the supramental, but of the intuitivized mind. The mind as it organized by the supramental. I gave this name afterwards." Nirod Barun asked, "Was that a vision?" Sri Aurobindo, "No, it was not a vision. I would not have trusted a vision." And then he said, "The contact lasted about 3 weeks and then he withdrew." If we go through the teachings of Sri Aurobindo and Swamiji, we would see that their idea of nation, their idea of religion, somewhere they are threatened with each other. So this is the reason we are celebrating, we are observing the talks, their teachings today at this stage. So now, may I request Professor Iman Lahiri, Head of the Department of the International Relations, Jadavpur University, to deliver his oration on Swami Vivekananda and his social philosophy of love and service.
Good evening, everybody. I'm thankful to the Ramakrishna Mission Institute of Culture and Eastern Zonal Cultural Center for inviting me this evening to deliver the speech on Swami Vivekananda. I extend my heartiest gratitude to Srimati Gouri Basu, the Director, EZCC, Sri Ranjan, the Secretary of Sri Aurobindo Institute of Culture, and our beloved Shotoda Swami Suparnananda Ji Maharaj, the Secretary of this Institute of Culture. And I extend my gratitude to all of you, those who are here to attend this ceremony this auspicious day. So since the time is given to me is 15 minutes, I'll try to cover up the entire idea of Swami Vivekananda and his social philosophy of love and service. Since this is a structured lecture, because I think that I must not go beyond the time given to me. However, sometimes I may use some Bengali words on certain issues. The immense contribution of Swami Vivekananda to the moral and social philosophy of India and the rest of the world are sometimes overlooked. His ideas has a strong influence on social, religious and political leaders. In fact, freedom fighters who lived between the end of 19th century and the beginning of 20th century were influenced by Vivekananda. The freedom fighters had either his photo or books. The British government described him as a tough politician who took cover in saffron robes. Even Mahatma Gandhi, the father of the Indian nation, was also a strong follower of Swami Vivekananda, which is evident from K. Swaminathan's editorial, who was the editor-in-chief of the collected works of Mahatma Gandhi, who said, Gandhi essentially belongs to the line of Sri Ramakrishna Paramahansa and Swami Vivekananda, and as if by divine wish. Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose was also greatly influenced by Swami Vivekananda. We all know the story that the idea of eternity, what Swami Vivekananda developed, inspired Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose greatly. The Vivekananda's objections to the ancient caste system and hatred among the various ethnic groups were attempts at social reform, what we see today. A generation of scholars, Pandits, mystics, Hindu sects, and even other religions have either openly embraced or acknowledged Swami Vivekananda's teaching of unity and peace. His travels abroad fostered a rapid spread of his messages of religious harmony, especially among the Indian diaspora. The legacy of his visit is evident in the Ramakrishna Math and Mission, which he founded in 1897. Modern India found its savior in Swami Vivekananda, who was born in 1863 and died in 1902 at a relatively young age of 39 years. This new prophet's influence on the society was indeed dynamic, welcome, and more opportune, peaking during a period of social and political and turmoil in the Asian subcontinent. Vivekananda was an expositor of the teachings of the Vedanta. His teachings, philosophy and thinking reflected a soul willing to rescue India from the moral, spiritual and social doldrums that had completely enveloped it during previous centuries. Indeed, Vivekananda's austere life of piety, combined with his penetrating analysis of India's socio-political and religious difficulties, placed him among the pioneers who led India along the road of self-determination in modern times. In a letter written to Srimati Mrinalini Bose on 3rd January 1899, Vivekananda wrote, "Now it is the question is it good for the public at large that social rules are framed or no new society is formed?" Many reply to this in affirmative. Some again may hold that it is not so. Some men, being comparatively powerful, slowly bring all others under their control and by stratagem, force or adroitness gain their own objects. If this be true, what can be the meaning of the statement that there is danger in giving liberty to the ignorant? What again is the meaning of the liberty In the same letter, Vivekananda replied to the own questions he has raised. Liberty does not certainly means the absence of restraints in the path of misappropriation of wealth, etc. by you and me, but it is our natural right to be allowed to use our own body, intelligence or wealth according to our will without doing any harm to others. And all the members of the society ought to have the same opportunity for obtaining wealth, education or knowledge. Vivekananda said, one should raise the self by the self. Let each one work out own salvation, freedom in all matters. That is advance towards mukti is the worthiest gain of men. Those social rules which stand in the way of the unfoldment of this freedom are injurious, and steps should be taken to destroy them speedily. Those social institutions should be encouraged by which men advance in the path of freedom. One of the ideas when he was writing about modern India is important here. In this context, Vivekananda is saying, the individual's life is in the life of the whole. The individual's happiness is in the happiness of the whole. Apart from the whole, the individual's existence is incomplete. This is an eternal truth and is the bedrock on which the universe is built. To move slowly towards the infinite whole, bearing a constant feeling of intense sympathy and sameness with it, being happy with its happiness and being distressed in its affliction is the individual's sole duty. And this is the idea on which Vivekananda wanted to build India. In the land of religious diversity, Vivekananda was able to diffuse and delay a violent conflict among the religions in India. Vivekananda was able to offer a perspective that may be acceptable to all religions. In London in 1900, he preached about unity in diversity, drawing references from the main religious works, the Bible, Quran, Upanishads, the Vedas. In his talk, The Real Nature of Man, during this era, there were certain attitudes prevalent in India that adverse consequences of any religious compromise, such as the church worked as a wing of imperial control and imposed humility. Islam enforced conversion by compulsion and threats. An underlying theme in Swami Vivekananda's lectures is an emphasized need for religious harmonization. His comparative approach and reference to Christians, Jews, Muslims, Buddhists, and Hindus was a concerted effort to establish a commonality among these world religions. The Swami even added the conviction that Shiva Linga, converted into a cross, would form a shape of the Christian cross. In India, some of his worst enemies were Christian missionaries who were distraught at the work of the Swami Vivekananda because he had put an end to their era of unchallenged supremacy. Undoubtedly, Vivekananda was feared by persons who denounced the Hindu religion as heathenism and followers as heathens. On September 11, 1893, at the World Parliament of Religions held in Chicago, Vivekananda made a profound statement on the state of religion. He believed that if there is ever to be a universal religion, it must be which will have no location in place or time, which will be infinite, like the God it will preach, which will not to be Brahminic, the Buddhist, Christians or Mohammedan, but the sum total of all these and still have infinite space for development. This was one of his many public appeals to emphasize the common ground among religions and reconcile differences. It is obvious that in his quest for the regeneration of India, Vivekananda believed that religion should be more dynamic, that sectarianism and the further fragmentation of Hinduism was inimical to social solidarity. This was believed to be necessary because the Indian people needed to cultivate faith and view themselves as a total community. Additionally, Vivekananda believed that Sri Ramakrishna practiced all the different ideals of religion to demonstrate that each leads to one truth. এখানে কোনো এক জায়গায় বিবেকানন্দ বলছেন বুদ্ধের প্রাসঙ্গিকতা, বলছে ভারতবাসী উত্তর ভারত বা দক্ষিণ ভারত বিফ খাওয়া ছেড়ে দিয়েছে, তার কারণ এটা নয় ধর্ম তাকে জোর করেছে। সেখানে তিনি বুদ্ধের কণ্ঠস্বরের কথা বলছেন। বুদ্ধ বলেছিলেন এবং বুদ্ধ তার কণ্ঠ দিয়ে হিপনোটাইজ করেছিল সামগ্রিক ভারতবর্ষকে। ঠিক যে কথা স্বামী বিবেকানন্দ বর্তমান ভারতের পরিচালনার ক্ষেত্রে বলছেন, জোর নয়। Towards the end of the 19th century, one of the India's most serious problem was its escalating religious tensions and rivalry. The conflicts between Hinduism and Islam became more acute with increasing accusations among the Muslims and Christians that the Hindus practiced idol worship and infanticide. His identification of parallel trends and similar beliefs among the religions frequently appeared in his lectures. His aim to incorporate the many sects into a unified entity did not materialize because of powerful countervailing forces implanted by the British that fostered insularity among the peoples of different religions. The stratification of Indian society into 5 classes or varna had created misery and unhappiness for centuries. The maintenance of the rigid caste system with its different subcastes, that is jati, and particular prescriptions made it difficult for the lower classes to gain social mobility. Vivekananda saw the dire need to dismantle this system and uplift sections of the opposing society. Vivekananda strongly advocated that any societal groups that were uneducated or confined to the lower caste ought to be brought up to par with the society as a whole. In explaining the work of Ramakrishna Mission in the regeneration of India, Vivekananda argued that revolts will occur and Brahmins, Kshatriyas and Vaishyas will be produced, but the Shudra caste will not exist as their work would be done by machines. Such thoughts on social reform later influenced Gandhi, who renamed the outcasts Harijan, that is the children of God, and brought the social evils of the caste system into center stage. Despite Swami Vivekananda's attempt to defend the rights and dignity of persons in the caste system, he saw it as creating stability in the Indian society. It had some semblance of unity due to interdependence of the classes in terms of their duties and functions. These perceptions probably stemmed from his Brahmin theology that did not believe in social mobility. He also voiced his opinion on certain customs, such as the denial of child widows to marry because he considered marriage a duty rather than a privilege. In India's struggle against colonialism in the early 20th century, Swami Vivekananda inspired his people as they resisted British oppression and set the motion, the march to freedom. As a great revolutionary, his subtle message contained the patriotic fervor that was to awaken an otherwise subdued people. This inspiration and guidance coming from a respected and holy person was the inspiration and encouragement that India needed to surge ahead in the goal toward complete freedom. Vivekananda's teaching were often directed at India herself, as he believed that the continent's degeneration was hinged on such factors such as materialism, superstition, neglect of the masses, and the habit of speaking rather than taking decisive action. Vivekananda reminded India of her ancient splendor and heritage that should both serve as an inspiration and imbue confidence in her to meet modern challenges. Vivekananda also focused on another important factor contributing to India's degeneration, the hatred for each other. His undying belief that no man, no nation can hate others and live was relevant to India, especially with its rigid social stratification and limited social mobility. His message traversed the boundaries of all religions and classes and ethnic groups. He repented the wisdom of Sri Ramakrishna in dealing with the hypocrisy of religious persons, criticized no one, For all doctrines and creeds have some good in them. Show by your lives that religion does not mean words or names or sects, but it means spiritual realization. During India's period of religious and political turmoil, Vivekananda's teachings gained prominence despite an increasing hatred, the polarization of classes, an unstable economic atmosphere, and feelings of inferiority. Indeed, his talks of improving and reforming India seem more onerous. The Swami Vivekananda's style of preaching and mode of imparting wisdom in a humble manner can be linked to Jesus Christ's style of teaching. And like Christ, Vivekananda failed to provide immediate reform in society. Vivekananda was also an idealist and believed his master's character was the perfect ideal that everyone should strive for in this age. Turbulent events such as the later partition of India and Pakistan and deepening divisions within the Hindu community were strong indications that Vivekananda's teachings were, unfortunately, not fully appreciated. India had probably not reached a stage of development to readily implement and grasp the true genius of Swami Vivekananda. His solution for the generation of India was incompatible with the political rivalries of the moderates, princes, the extremists amidst economic and social turmoil. India would have been more responsive to revolutionary thought involving aggression and physical removal of the British. Vivekananda's call for patriotism, equality, and humility did not directly appeal to the masses. The Indian society could not fully grasp Vivekananda's use of the principles of Vedanta religion to remove colonialism and usher in that modernity and peace long desired. The prevalence of social vices like gambling, horse racing, and prostitution created serious societal problems. In advocating social changes, Vivekananda sought to remove the darkness from India, reveal a true inner beauty, and create an atmosphere to shake off the shackles of the British colonialism and imperialism. He appeared as Jug Pravartak, arising to the call and demand of the Kali Yug period, and his role was to improve the status of Hinduism and that of humanity in general. Indeed, Swamiji's unique style frequently fused the religious with the secular. His mission incorporated removing ignorance, replacing evil with good, assimilating the old with the new, and attempting to bind the people of the interworld. Vivekananda held a radical, all-compassing view, a universalism that every idea has to become broad till it covers the whole world. Every aspiration must go on increasing till it engulfs the whole humanity. He genuinely believed that there was a need for practical Vedanta that would be practical and ensure it eventually become part of our lives. Some of the principles of Gandhi were influenced by Vivekananda's fundamental views of self-confidence. Furthermore, his concepts of Vedanta reflected many similarities with many of the existing ideologies, democratic vision of Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose. The Swami Vivekananda's philosophy that every individual should be righteous, self-content, independent, and self-respecting assisted many of the philosophers in this land, India, including the Gandhian principles involving confidence and faith, were assimilated from Vivekananda's philosophy and were pivotal in the struggle for the independence of India. Swami Vivekananda cannot be seen in isolation, but in the context of the socio-religious reform movements simultaneously occurring in British India. These developments added a dimension of social service to Hinduism that had not previously existed under British rule. The mentor of Vivekananda, Ramakrishna, had many distinguished visitors, including Keshav Chandra Sen, the head of the Brahmo Samaj. This organization, founded in 1833, had as its goal education, creating self-confidence, and opposing idol worship and the caste system. Similarly, the Arya Samaj began in 1875, denounced idolatry, the caste system. This sect was founded by Swami Dwananda Saraswati and was the only movement existing for that time to undertake the challenges of the Swami to reform Indian society. Following in the general of these reform movements, the Vivekananda was to a certain extent influenced by their goals and teachings. He placed the existing knowledge of Vedanta in alignment with the ancient traditions to give stability, strength to Hinduism. Vivekananda, the courageous disciple of the saint of the Kineshwar Ramakrishna Paramahansa gave a new impetus to Ramakrishna mission. This institution provided education, boosted the speed of Hinduism, and provided a social service to the entire world. As an unofficial ambassador of India, Vivekananda embarked on a mission to read the Western mind of the unconceived, erroneous and prejudicial views about India and Hinduism. His overseas tours to the United States and London were aimed at eradicating the doubts, fears, the ignorance of many foreigners, some of which are outlined in his classic memoirs of European travel. To the Westerner, the Swamiji's philosophical discourse was not the abstract and impractical as traditional Eastern philosophy often appeared. Indeed, Swami Vivekananda's task as a true revealer and missionary for India was made more difficult by perceptions of India as a backward land of disease, caste system, famine, and communal violence. Undoubtedly, Vivekananda's role in educating others at home and abroad on the concepts of Hinduism was a boon to India. His lectures on Karma Yoga served to illuminate the power of mind as it emphasized duty and self-control to concepts lacking throughout the modern world. His simple message to the others was that all good acts make us pure and perfect, while different paths of work, love, psychology, and knowledge all lead to the same God. In his Karma Yoga, Swami Vivekananda endorsed the changes that India was slowly undergoing and warned that we should always try to help the world, and that should be the highest motive, but that this world was not made that you or I should come and help it. To what extent were the teachings of Swami Vivekananda really integrated and adopted by Indians? That remains a question. Suspicion between us, caste rivalries, political assassinations, sectarian violence, tribal rivalries continue today and pose a formidable challenge to peace within India. Even though he has been epitomized by Rabindranath Tagore, if you want to understand India, study Vivekananda. In him, everything is positive. There are certain shortcomings in his work. First, he should have spent more time in India and attempt to harness more resources in confronting social problems. Second, he was a good writer and speaker, but his ability as a dynamic leader in enforcing social reforms and effectiveness in assisting at the grassroots levels can be seriously questioned and even refuted. But nevertheless, it was beyond the human ability for one man in a relatively short lifetime and with limited resources to unravel the injustices and heal the scores of India that has been festering for centuries. It was difficult for someone seeking such attributes as truth and justice on spiritual dimension to penetrate the Indian psyche after centuries of oppressive rule and suddenly transform the mode of life. Vivekananda was able to guide India through a transitional period. But more men of his stature were needed to continually emphasize the wisdom and teachings of the religious texts. He accepted that. His works laid the foundation, both intellectual and moral, for leaders to valiantly struggle for India's independence. His personal life was a true demonstration of self-discipline, simplicity, and dedication to the improvement of humanity. By absorbing the outpourings of his Guru, Sri Ramakrishna, the Swami was able to leave a golden legacy for the peoples of India and the world. Indeed, he proved to be an inspiration both at home and abroad, as his revolutionary ideologies transformed the political and social landscape of India. The sterling character of Vivekananda reveals that India never lacked the spiritual chance to prove that India was a land of philosophy, ethics, and spirituality. He provided a model for India in the 20th century with his rediscovery of certain basic tenets of Hinduism and the idea of the soul's immortality that was the common denominator among the world's religions. I thank you all for your patience, and in brief, I've tried to analyze Vivekananda's idea of social philosophy, love and service. Thank you.
Thank you, Imanda. I'm reminded of some prophetic words of Swamiji when he said, "It may be that I shall find it good to get outside of my body to cast it off like a disused garment. But I shall not cease to work. I shall inspire men everywhere until the world realizes that it is one with God. We see that this promise of Swamiji didn't went in vain. He kept his promise, and that promise was witnessed in the life of the great Sri Aurobindo. His idea shared the views of Swamiji as well, when he opined, the yoga we practice is not for ourselves alone, but for the divine. Its aim is to walk out of the will of the divine in the world, to effect a spiritual transformation and to bring down a divine nature and a divine life into the mental, vital and physical nature and the life of humanity. Its object is not personal mukti, although mukti is a necessary condition of the yoga, but the liberation and transformation of human being in all. It is not personal ananda, but the bringing down of the divine ananda, Christ's kingdom of heaven, our Satya Yoga upon the earth. Now, may I request Honorable Sri Ranjan Meter, Secretary of Sri Aurobindo Institute of Culture, to deliver an address on the subject Sri Aurobindo and his philosophy.
Respected Swami Suparnananda ji, respected Swami Suparnananda ji, and everyone here at Ramakrishna Mission Institute of Culture, dear Srimati Gouri Basu, Director of EZCC, and everyone assembled here, and I believe this is being also broadcast live, so everyone who's watching. First of all, I feel truly blessed. I feel honored, of course, by the invitation of Swami Suparnananda ji, whom I deeply respect, and when he called and requested me, I of course didn't say no. And of course, I have a long association. I admire Srimati Gouri Basu and her work a lot, so she also spoke, so in fact, so that was sealed. But when Swami Suparnananda ji told me that I had to speak at the Vivekananda Hall, I considered myself truly blessed. Shayok has been at pains to explain to all of us here that a session on Swami Vivekananda and Sri Aurobindo from the same platform is not just coincidental, and I would subscribe completely as an Aurobindonian to that point of view. In fact, as Shayok rightly pointed out, a huge and decisive turn of Sri Aurobindo's life was in Alipur jail, and Swami Vivekananda spent several weeks with him, initiating him to the concept of the intuitive mind, which is one of the 7 stages of the supermind, as Sri Aurobindo has coined it. Anyway, so therefore I feel hugely blessed that at the feet of Swamiji I can deliver this address. It was 150 years ago. We can't forget that because this is his 150 years. 150 years ago, on 15th of August 1872, at the crack of dawn, in this very city that Sri Aurobindo was born. The first 5 years of his life was spent with his parents in Rangpur, which is now in Bangladesh. And in 1879, he was sent along with his 2 elder brothers, to England. This was, of course, after 2 years in Loreto Convent, Darjeeling. At Manchester in England, he stayed with a clergyman, Mr. Druitt, and his wife. And the brief given by his father, Dr. Krishnadhan Ghosh, was that his children should receive an entirely European upbringing with no contact or with any Indian and with Indian influence. And of course, Mr. and Mrs. Druitt followed that to the T. So Mr. Druitt initiated him to the concepts of, and his brothers, to the concept of Christianity, also taught him Latin very, very well, and with that basis he continued with Greek later on and became a brilliant scholar in Greek and Latin, of course, but also French, German and Italian. In 1884, that means after 5 years in Manchester, Sri Aurobindo moved as a student, of course, and still in school, to St. Paul's in London, and spent 6 years there. In 1890, he was admitted as a probationer to the ICS, the Indian Civil Service, in the month of July, and in the same year went on a scholarship to King's College, Cambridge. At Cambridge, he was to join the Indian Majlis, which was a students' group, and made several speeches advocating India's freedom. So it was at the age of 18 that he started publicly, in a sense, although it was a very small gathering of people, speaking about India's freedom. 2 years later, in 1892, in the month of May, and I deliberately use these months, you will understand why in a short while, he passed the first part of the classical tripos with a first class. And in August, he passed the ICS exam. So he'd already cleared the classical tripos with the first class. And in August, he had cleared the written examination of the Indian Civil Service with flying colors, with doing very, very well. In October, of course, having completed his course, he leaves Cambridge and returns to London. And along with others then forms a secret society called Lotus and Dagger, again devoted to Indian freedom. In the same year, in November 1892, he did not deliberately present himself for the riding examination. He did so because he could not, to his father, whose entire objective was that, he would train as an administrator and come back as a brilliant ICS officer to India with his English upbringing. He could not bear or countenance the fact that he would have to disappoint his father. So he deliberately chose the path of not presenting himself for the riding exam and disqualified himself from the ICS. Meanwhile, of course, his father, Dr. K.D. Ghosh, was sending him newspapers, particularly the Bengali, making cases of maltreatment of Indians by Englishmen. Of course, Dr. Krishnadhan Ghosh's ostensible purpose was that Sri Aurobindo, seeing these articles, would derive an independent view of how to govern India when he would come back as a qualified ICS officer. But as you can quite well realize, the effect it had on him was quite the opposite. Indian Majlis first, Lotus and Dagger second, public speeches advocating India's freedom. None of this probably Dr. K.D. Ghosh had even imagined in his wildest dreams. In the meanwhile, at the age of 11, just 11, when he was still a schoolboy, Sri Aurobindo had already received strongly the impression that a period of general upheaval and great revolutionary changes was coming in the world, and he himself was destined to play a part in it. His attention was now drawn to India, and this feeling was soon canalized into the idea of the liberation of his own country, which solidified in a matter of 4 years by the age of 15. So you can see how, as a young boy and in his teenage, the idea of India's freedom really unfolded. In 1892, when he was 14 years old, he had his first pre-yogic experience, he calls it, the mental experience of the Atman. So in fact, what you see in him, on one side, the student, on a second side, a person advocating the liberation of India, on a third side, a spiritual realization. These were not divorced from each other, as was pointed out a little while ago as well. On February 6, 1893, coincidentally the same year that Swami Vivekananda was journeying to Chicago for the Parliament of Religions, Sri Aurobindo arrived at Apollo Bandar in Bombay. And the moment he arrived, it was completely an altered feeling. And he recounts it as follows. He says, a vast peace and calm descended on him, never to leave again. This he said in the third person. In the close of his stay in England, in the month of December of the previous year, he had made the acquaintance of Maharaja Sayajirao Gaikwad, the Maharaja of Baroda, and had ingratiated him, and the Maharaja thought that he was brilliantly qualified for an administrative service with the Maharaja. It was a prize catch, in fact, for him. And he started working in Baroda from 1893. In fact, he lived there for close to 13 years, and he worked in various administrative departments. But the Maharaja spotted academic talent in him, thought that he would make a great teacher, and moved him later, first as a teacher of French, then a teacher of English, eventually an education administrator, a vice principal, and in his last years as an acting principal of Baroda College, which is now the Maharaja Sayajirao University in Baroda. So this is his Baroda period. Now, the political action of Sri Aurobindo actually didn't start in Calcutta. It started in 1902 in Baroda. So what happened at that point in 1902 was that he sent, in 1900 actually, he sent Jyotindranath Banerjee to Bengal as his lieutenant for revolutionary organization and propaganda. Meanwhile, in 1893, just after arriving in Baroda, while he was in real danger of a carriage accident, he had a vision of a Godhead surging up within him. So the two movements happening parallelly. In 1894, in a friend's journal, New Lamps for Old, Indu Prakash, which was published from Bombay, he serialized several articles, essays called New Lamps for Old. Parallelly, he wrote a lot of poetry in those years. Starting in 1902, and that's when we say he started his political action, he started using his vacations from the Baroda service to organize revolutionary work in Bengal. In 1903, on a visit to Srinagar with the Maharaja of Baroda, at the Takht-e-Suleiman, he experienced the vacant infinite. Between 1902 and 1907, he attended several sessions of the Indian National Congress. The first one being at Ahmedabad, where he made the acquaintance of Lokmanya Tilak. Then in 1904 in Bombay, in 1905 in Benares, in 1906 in Calcutta, and eventually in 1907 in Surat, which witnessed the formal breakup of the Congress into moderate and nationalist or extremist factions, depending on how you call it. All right? So now let us move a little bit to understanding a little bit his philosophy. So this is now from Sri Aurobindo himself. He says, the political action of Sri Aurobindo covered 8 years, from 1902 to 1910. During the first half of this period, he worked behind the scenes, preparing with co-workers the beginnings of the Swadeshi, Indian Sinn Féin movement, Sinn Féin being the movement in the Irish Republic, till the agitation in Bengal furnished an opening for the public initiation of a more forward and direct political action than the moderate reformism which had till then been the creed of the Indian National Congress. In 1906, Sri Aurobindo came to Bengal with this purpose and joined the new party, an advanced section small in numbers and not yet strong in influence, which had been recently formed in the Congress. The political theory of this party was a rather vague gospel of non-cooperation. The newborn nationalist party put forward Swaraj, independence, as its goal, as against the far-off moderate hope of colonial self-government to be realized at a distant date of a century or two by a slow progress of reform. And Sri Aurobindo hoped to capture the Congress and make it the directing center of an organized national action, an informal state within the state, which would carry on the struggle for freedom till it was won. So that in fact was his political philosophy as we understand it. Meanwhile, cutting back to the action, on March 11, 1906, he was in Calcutta for the formation of the National Council for Education. And that is the precursor of Jadavpur University, where Professor Iman and Lahiri, of course, currently teaches. On the very next day, on March 12, Jugantar was launched, a Bengali weekly. Sri Aurobindo wrote several articles in early numbers and later exercised a general control over it. In the same year, a few months later, August, he joined Bipin Chandra Pal in the editing of the Bande Mataram and became the assistant editor of that journal. In August 1906, he took charge of Bande Mataram and the policies of the Nationalist Party. Now coming back to 1907, 1907 now represents a very eventful year, as we just saw. That is the year of the breakup between the moderates and the extremists in the Surat Congress. But at the same time, in the same year, he was arrested for seditious writing in the Bande Mataram, and he was released on bail. And in December of that year, Sri Aurobindo gives the order that leads to the breaking of the Congress. So the same year. So coming back to the arrest and release. After that happened, Rabindranath Tagore met him at a very interesting address, and that is at Wellington Square, in the house of Raja Subodh Chandra Mallik. And Rabindranath told him, "Amake to khub jor phaki dilen," because he had written the poem Namaskar by the time, Aurobindo Robindre Laho Namaskar, imagining that he was already in jail. Ya devotar deepo haste je ashilo bhabe, shei rudra dute bolo kon raja kabe pare shasti dite. So, but Sri Aurobindo stoically replied, and that was his hallmark for his entire lifetime. He said, "Not for long." So a very interesting, story. In the same house of Raja Subodh Chandra Mallik, he has been seen several times. He stayed on a first-floor room. He had been seen several times by a servant to be levitating quite a few feet above the bed. All right. So in 1908, back in Baroda in January, he met Vishnu Bhaskar Lele. This was a yogi. And with his help, in a few days' time, he established the silence of mind, attaining to the experience of the silent Brahman. On 2nd May of that year, just after the infamous, the bomb that was thrown on, it was attempted on Kingsford in Muzaffarpur by Khudiram and Prafulla Chaki. So just after that incident, and of course it went on the wrong carriage, and innocent English civilians were killed. So he was arrested from his lodgings at Grey Street, which was the office of Navashakti. And on 5th May, after staying in lockup in Lal Bazar for 3 days, he was taken to Alipur jail and eventually into solitary confinement. Coming back to another facet of his political philosophy, and this is a letter to his wife. He had meanwhile married in 1901, if I'm not wrong. And in this letter, he talks about 3 madnesses, a very famous letter of his, and I read the translation, the original is in Bengali. He says the 3rd madness is, whereas others regard the country as an inert piece of matter and know it as the plains, the fields, the forests, the mountains and the rivers, I know my country as the mother. I worship and adore her accordingly. So this was his view, his understanding of what India represented. On a different note, in a different essay on Rishi Bankim Chandra, Sri Aurobindo wrote, in that same period, it is not till the motherland reveals herself as a great divine and maternal power in a form of beauty that can dominate the mind and seize the heart, that these petty fears and hopes vanish in the all-absorbing passion for our mother and her service, and the patriotism that works miracles and saved a doomed nation is born. And he continues, it was 32 years ago that Bankim wrote his great song, and he alludes to the song Vande Mataram, and few listened. But in a sudden moment of awakening from long delusions, the people of Bengal looked around for the truth, and in a fated moment, somebody sang Vande Mataram. The mantra had been given, and in a single day, a whole people had been converted to the religion of patriotism. The mother had revealed herself. Once that vision has come to a people, there can be no rest, no peace, no further slumber, till the temple has been made ready, the image installed, and the sacrifice offered. A great nation which has had that vision can never again be placed under the feet of the conqueror. So, as I told you, on 5th of May, Sri Aurobindo was taken to Alipur jail, eventually to be put into solitary confinement. He spent the entire 1 year, he was released on 6th May of the following year, reading the Gita, the Upanishads in meditation and in yoga. And as I recounted at the beginning of my address, he spent 3 weeks with Swami Vivekananda, who initiated him initially and gave him clues of the supermind without exactly using that expression. In 1909, Sri Aurobindo was acquitted by none other than his friend, Justice Beechcroft. And Justice Beechcroft, C.R. Beechcroft, was his friend, and not his friend, but his fellow student from Cambridge. One of the things that we think was instrumental in his release was the famous closing speech of C.R. Das, who was the defense counsel. And C.R. Das prophetically said, "My appeal to you, therefore, is that a man like this, who is being charged with the offenses imputed to him, stands not only before the bar in this court, but stands before the bar of the High Court of History. And my appeal to you is this, that long after this controversy is hushed in silence, long after this turmoil, this agitation ceases, long after he is dead and gone, he will be looked upon as the poet of patriotism, as the prophet of nationalism, and the lover of humanity. Long after he is dead and gone, his words will be echoed and re-echoed, not only in India, but across distant seas and lands. Therefore, I say that the man in his position is not only standing before the bar of this court, but before the bar of the High Court of History." So Sri Aurobindo was acquitted to a hero's welcome on the 6th of May 1909. I should mention in passing that in Surat, when he was going to attend the Surat Congress, history recounts that he was received at every railway station like a king. That is what the British newspapers of that age wrote. Now, I should also comment a little bit on the demeanor of Sri Aurobindo while in jail. And you see, he was absolutely, when people saw him in court, he was absolutely calm, relaxed, with no worries. And he gave no brief. And the reason, he explained on 30th May 1909 in a public speech at Uttarpada Library, the Jai Krishna Library. And he says, "I looked at the jail that secluded me from men, and it was no longer by its high walls that I was imprisoned. No, it was Vasudeva who surrounded me. I walked under the branches of the tree in front of my cell, but it was not the tree. I knew it was Vasudeva. It was Sri Krishna whom I saw standing there and holding over me his shade. I looked at the bars of my cell, the very grating that did duty for a door, and again I saw Vasudeva. It was Narayana who was guarding and standing sentry over me. Or I lay on the coarse blankets that were given me for a couch, and felt the arms of Sri Krishna around me, the arms of my friend and lover. So, you see the entire experience, and he recounts that in his Bengali book Karakahini, that the British thought they sent him to jail, but it turned out to be a year of ashram life. So I, dare say that Sri Aurobindo ashram in that sense, the first incarnation was not founded in Pondicherry, but was in a solitary cell in Alipur. In 1910, when he was working in the office of the Dharma in Shampukur, he got an inner call, something that he had been used to ever since that speech where I recounted his speaking about his religion of patriotism. He had got used to an inner voice and to listen to its command. And this voice told him to leave immediately for Chandanagar. He packed his bags, went to the ghat, boarded the boat, arrived in Chandanagar, stayed with his friend Motilal Roy for a month, and during that period wrote essays which later were serialized, or rather published as a book, System of National Education. On March 31, 1910, historic date, he leaves Bengal by the SS Dupleix, and on 4th April 1910, he arrived in Pondicherry. He stayed at various houses, moved lodgings several times, stayed with sympathizers, met Kavi Subramanya Bharati, another sympathizer of Indian nationalism at that point in time. Some revolutionaries went along with him, some others joined him later on, a small group of people. And in 1914, Mira Alfasa, whom we now revere and know as the mother, arrived and met him on the 29th of March, 1914. The mother and her husband Paul Richard were instrumental in convincing Sri Aurobindo to start another journal. Remember, by now, Sri Aurobindo was quite accomplished at that, with Jugantar and Vande Mataram to start with. After his release, it was Dharma in Bengali and Karma Yogin in English, and now came the Arya. And in the Arya, Sri Aurobindo started serializing several works at the same time. And they were Secret of the Veda, Isha Upanishad, The Life Divine, and Synthesis of Yoga. And in 1918 to this list was added, Is India Civilized? This entire work spanned roughly to around 1920, by which all of Sri Aurobindo's major works were complete. Now, what is the character of Sri Aurobindo's complete works? If we just pause for a moment and see. On one side, there is a huge work on Indian culture, which is titled The Foundations of Indian Culture. It starts with this article, which he wrote in 1918 in the Arya, Is India Civilized? It was in response to somebody called William Archer writing an essay on the same topic, and Sri Aurobindo writing back on that. And the way, the style he writes is very interesting. He takes that thing, Is India Civilized? That is the first part. And he comments on William Archer's article. Then there is an entire section with several chapters where Sri Aurobindo kind of steps out and considers himself an Occidental. Mind you, he spent 21 years without knowing a word of Bengali. It was only in Baroda that from Dinendra Kumar Rai he picked up some Bengali, and of course he learned Gujarati, Marathi and Sanskrit. So that entire Occidental view, and he wrote several sections, several chapters under the title, A Rationalistic Critic of Indian Culture. And then, stepping inside the circle, as it were, inside the Lakshman Rekha, he serialized another set of chapters which he called The Defense of Indian Culture. In all this, he dealt at length with Indian literature, Indian poetry, Indian music, Indian dance, Indian architecture, Indian philosophy, Indian religion, Indian science, Indian mathematics, the entire exposition, as if he was opening an entire horizon to his countrymen. At the same time, as I said in Arya, he serialized essays on the Gita. And again, the same style, where his first chapter in that book is Our Demand and Need from the Gita. He tries to seek the reader's understanding, is the Gita at all required to be read? Our demand and need from the Gita. The second chapter in that book is equally interesting. He goes to the central character of the Gita, Krishna himself. The second chapter is titled The Divine Teacher. The third chapter is equally apt, The Human Disciple. And the fourth chapter, The Core of the Teaching. I'm just telling you how Sri Aurobindo exposes in his work. Another very interesting book on India is called The Secret of the Veda, and where Sri Aurobindo challenges the interpretations given by Sayana, goes to the depths of etymology, the roots of Indian of words of that time, that's probably written in Brahmic script, and tries to derive what was the symbolism and seeks to understand the Vedas more as a symbol and as the pinnacle of Indian wisdom literature. Very, very interesting book, even for somebody who's just keen to understand language. So how to understand a language which is apparently lost? Because the Sanskrit of 5,000 or 7,000 years ago is not understood anymore. So how do you go back to that time, discover and uncover the secrets and come out with what could have been the real intent of the seers in saying and invoking and offering the invocations the way they did? And of course, an entire serial started with the Upanishads and Isha Upanishad and the entire set of Upanishads. There were his new thoughts and his original writings, like the Life Divine, his magnum opus, the Synthesis of Yoga, where he looks at all the forms of yoga and tries to synthesize them into one, and an entire set of work on the human cycle, where he talks of the cycle of reason, so on and so forth, the ideal of human unity, where he talks of the League of Nations and the United Nations, and war and self-determination, where he talks of the First World War. And of course, as you know, later on in Pondicherry, he was very active in following the Second World War and trying to put his spiritual force in motion to see to it that that fight came to a logical fruition for humanity. A third section of his work, very importantly, the one that he continued lifelong, is very interesting. And that is that work which he started in England as a child, as a young boy, poetry. And in the Arya, you see his works that, poems continued, sonnets and other kinds of poems. And then there were also poems in new meters, and long poems, short poems, various kinds of poems. And eventually, his other magnum opus, his epic, if you call it one, in the style of the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, which is also, Sri Aurobindo calls it a legend and a symbol, Savitri, which talks of how the earth gets rescued by Savitri and divinized. So the divinization of matter is at the core of Sri Aurobindo's message in his 25,000 lines in Savitri. But an equally important book, Savitri's 25,000 lines, probably, as on today, I haven't checked my facts of late, but probably the longest epic written in the English language. But this equal essence and equally important is a small book, probably the smallest book written by Sri Aurobindo, which is titled The Mother. As I was introduced, you heard I come from Sri Aurobindo Institute of Culture. It was established by a gentleman of the Tagore family, Sri Arunindranath Tagore. And Arunindranath Tagore said, I have not understood the life divine, but what I've done is I've memorized the Mother. And even there, I've not been able to practice even a line. It's very jokingly, he was a great man and a very humble man, and this is what he had to say. Very, very interesting. So the Mother is an equally important work that that was written by Sri Aurobindo. Now let me just try and tell you basically his vision. So he had 5 dreams of India. One is, he talks about an India that is one and undivided, and he says by some means this partition must go. He says this on the 15th of August 1947. He says that the fact that India becomes independent or became independent on his 75th birthday was not a coincidence. Rather, not something fortuitous, but rather a decision of the divine. His second dream, and he said at that point in time itself, and we have seen in the following 75 years, even more of that coming true, the resurgence and liberation of the peoples of Asia, and a return to her great role in the progress of human civilization. If anything, the last 75 years has seen the huge resurgence, the huge rise of Asia as an economic power, even as a military power, and of many scientific inventions, innovations, many business thoughts. It's a whole thing. The third dream Sri Aurobindo talked about was a world dream forming the outer basis of a fairer, brighter, and nobler life for all mankind. In 1968, the mother gave shape or germinated the seed of that thing in an experiment which she called Auroville, 10 kilometers from Pondicherry, where it is an UNESCO project, and the soil of 128 nations, that was the number of nations at that time, members of UNESCO, gave their soil, and which is put in an urn in the amphitheater in the center of Auroville. The fourth dream of Sri Aurobindo, and he said at that point in time, the spiritual gift of India to the world has already begun. So that, of course, we can thank, first of all, the pioneering spirit here, Swami Vivekananda. It was he who actually started giving that gift of spirituality of India to the contemporary model world. And the final dream, he said, was a step in evolution which would raise man to a higher and larger consciousness and begin the solution of the problems which have perplexed and vexed him since he first began to think and to dream of individual perfection and a perfect society. For that, he talks about the descent of the supermind. Now, let me try and see the whole character of Sri Aurobindo's life, if you will. He reached a high pinnacle in Cambridge. He had secured first class in the classical tripos. He was about to become a brilliant administrator of the ICS. He had scored lovely marks in the ICS written examination. He turned his back and he came back for India's freedom. He went to Baroda. He rose to become acting principal of Baroda College. He could have been a great academic, a great educationist, done great work for national education further on, not just writing articles and teaching, but done more as an administrator of a princely state. He turned his back on it. In 1910 and thereafter, he was offered several times to become president of the Indian National Congress at its various sessions. He turned his back on it. He chose a life of seclusion. And in 1926, which is called the descent of the overmind, which he says is the descent of the Krishna consciousness on earth and in him and in there also he turned his back on it because he wanted to proceed on his quest for this deeper perfection and this greater truth which he called the supermind, which eventually descended into his body, and that is why there was this bluish golden light emanating from his body when he passed away, and his body laid apparently immortal between the 5th and the 9th of December 1950. And that light, the supramental consciousness, descended 6 years after he passed away, or 5 years after he passed away, in 1956 on the 29th of February. Now, are therefore then these complete turnarounds of Sri Aurobindo's life a change of conviction? I would say no. I read to you a little while ago that letter to Mrinalini, where he talked about his third madness. In the same year, he wrote Durga Stotra, 1909, and he wrote the following in the concluding stanzas: Mother Durga, when we possess thee, we shall no longer cast thee away. We shall bind thee to us with the tie of love and devotion. Come, revealer of the hero path, we shall no longer cast thee away. May our entire life become a ceaseless worship of the Mother. All our acts are continuous service to the mother, full of love, full of energy. I just shared with you that Savitri and the mother are essentially the core of his philosophy and the core of his teaching, if you will. And you see, this is very interesting. So we've covered, so it is that worship of the mother as Mother India, the mother as the divine mother, the mother that one could speak to. In fact, if you go on to that speech, the present situation which he gave in Bombay, he talks intimately of Ramakrishna Paramahansa and of his direct experience of meeting the mother face to face. And he continues with that, and he considers that as the core of Indian nationalism, the finding of the mother. The quest of the mother, the finding of the mother, and the establishment of the mother. That is what I would say is the core of things. And it's very interesting that, you know, when he left the Bengal National College, he said something very interesting. He said, I wish to see, and he told his students, some of you becoming great, great not for your own sakes, not that you may satisfy your vanity, but great for her. To make India great, to enable her to stand up with head erect among the nations of the earth, as she did in days of yore, when the world looked up to her for light. I want to see even those who will remain poor and obscure. I want to say their very poverty and obscurity devoted to the motherland. There are times in the nation's history when Providence places before it one work, one aim to which everything else, however high and noble in itself, has to be sacrificed. Such a time has now arrived for our motherland, when nothing is dearer than her service, when everything else is to be directed to that one end. Now we may ask ourselves, what is it that we need to do? Sri Aurobindo has said this to the youth of Bengal, to the youth of India. So, and he says elsewhere also, our call is to the youth of India. But what exactly does he want us to do? So, Sri Aurobindo says elsewhere, the schemes by which we seek to prepare the nation, the scheme of industrial regeneration, the scheme of educational regeneration, the scheme of political regeneration through self-help are subordinate features of the deeper regeneration which the country must go through before it can be free. The mother asks us for no schemes, no plans, no methods. She herself will provide the schemes, the plans, the methods, better than any that we can devise. She asks us for our hearts, our lives, nothing less, nothing more. And finally, at various points in time, we ask ourselves, is the nation going in the right direction? The nation is going to be 75. We just witnessed the 75th, what is this called? The Azadi ki Amrit Mahotsav. Have we matured as a nation? Have we arrived? I think Sri Aurobindo asks us to ask that question to the mother in ourselves. To ask that of ourselves and to look at our duty. And he tells us, they must have the firm faith that India must rise and be great, and that everything that happened, every difficulty, every reverse, must help and further their end. The trend was upward and the time of decline was over. The morning was at hand, and once the light had shown itself, it could never be night again. The dawn would soon be complete, and the sun rise over the horizon. The sun of India's destiny would rise and fill all India with its light, and overflow India, and overflow Asia, and overflow the world. Every hour, every moment could only bring them nearer to the brightness of the day that God had decreed. Sri Aurobindo was once asked, are you convinced that your work will succeed? He said yes. He paused, he said yes. He was a man of few words, and he said, even if I had known otherwise, I wouldn't have done anything differently. And he put that as his concluding paragraph in his book, The Mother, and that is what I would conclude with. And he talks here of that final change, his fifth dream. The supramental change is a thing decreed, and inevitable in the evolution of the earth consciousness, for its upward ascent is not ended, and mind is not its last summit. But that the change may arrive, take form and endure, there is needed the call from below with a will to recognize and not deny the light when it comes, and there is needed the sanction of the Supreme from above. The power that mediates between the sanction and call is the presence and power of the Divine Mother. The Mother's power, and not any human endeavor and tapasya, can alone rend the lid and tear the covering and shape the vessel, and bring down into this world of obscurity and falsehood and death and suffering truth and light and life divine and the immortal's Ananda. Namaskar.
Now the vote of thanks by Revered Swami Suparnananda Ji Maharaj, Secretary to the Ramakrishna Mission Institute of Culture.
What a beautiful afternoon, both of you, Iman Kalyan and Sri Ranjan Meter, offered to us this afternoon. We have been mesmerized in a way when we have been listening to Ranjanda and also Iman. We understand why. Now with perfect certitude, we understood why did Sri Aurobindo leave a revolutionary contact. So we have been listening to the great speakers in Bengal especially, all criticizing Sri Aurobindo for leaving the field of revolution in the middle. And Ranjanda, you know very well that even the last year, even last 2 years seminars that you organized, there also this problem cropped up. They do so because they do not have the access to read or have no desire to read Sri Aurobindo. At some time I used to read methodically his essays on the Gita and was astonished. I discussed some of its issues with Govinda Gopal Mukherjee, and he encouraged me, Maharaj, you try to go through the depth of it and you understand what a great mind he was. Really, we are very much thankful to you, Ranjanda, for presenting before us the entire life sketch of Sri Aurobindo. Now, I can read out some of one or two ideas explaining why he did leave this politics. I did not leave, in his famous Uttarpada speech, he stated, I didn't leave politics because I could not do nothing more there. He had many more music in him when he left politics, mind that. He could have been able to contribute more, but still he did leave it. He left it because he felt all problems in life are essentially the problems of harmony. And you know, the single word harmony, he meant his own life a harmony of all thoughts. More clearly he stated it again, there are stunts and booms behind all activities, and the stunts and booms exhaust the thing they carry on their crests. Such a beautiful expression. And leave it lifeless and broken, high and dry on the shore of nowhere, or it means a movement. See, Aurobindo has no faith in movement. A movement, in the case of a work like mine, means the founding of a school or a sect or some other damn nonsenses. Hundreds and thousands of useless people join in. If you start a movement, you will get hundreds and thousands of people joining there. And corrupt the work or reduce it to a pompous into secrecy and silence. What an observation. If, and insofar as publicity serves the truth, I am quite ready to tolerate it, but I do not find publicity for its own sake desirable. So, I was never ardent about fame, even in my political days. I prefer to remain behind the curtain, push people without their knowing it, just see, and get the things done. It was the confounded British government that spoiled my game. By what? By persecuting me and forcing me to be publicly known as a leader. I used to believe advertisement for serious work, advertisement for serious work is a poison. We left it. He retired to live a life of a recluse because he wants to have harmonious development in him first, and then to inject it into the vitality, national vitality in the nation itself. Anyway, we have been listening to Iman, and he made several important conclusions also, observations also, which we must think over. We have to read Swamiji very seriously and find out where we shall do what kind of action. We know that he gave us a completely new conceptions of life and religion. He was the pioneer, mind that. He understood every phase of humanity. He appealed to every grade of intelligence by his oratory, by his humor, by his mimicry, by his scornful denunciation of any form of pettiness and weakness and intolerance, by his compassion for every human need. He didn't discard any human need. That was Swami Vivekananda. And he dwelt on Vedanta, Advaita Vedanta. When people used to say, "Oh, Swami, you cannot teach Advaita to the people at large." In a large meeting, when you speak about Advaita, you would be a failure. But Swamiji, what sort of confidence he had? He said, "No, I can make even a child understand it." And he did. I had a proof. This is not the time to elucidate that. I didn't also have faith in this statement that even a child can be made to understand his Advaita, which he demands. But he was correct, absolutely correct. I knew a child of this, say, height, and he told me a question. He asked me a question, which his grandfather, who had 11 Tirtha, his grandfather, probably the highest qualified person in Sanskrit in Bengal. 11th Tirthas, 11 Tirthas. Well, I could not answer this boy's question. You do. And I made him understand. And ultimately he said, then, if a man can become a god, like Vivekananda, Ramakrishna, Buddha, Chaitanya, then I, a boy, then there would be a temple erected for me? I mean, yes, you have to show in yourself that divine splendor. You have to become a god. Then people who know you will build a temple for you, mind that. He understood it. That has been the answer he gave. Will there be any temple for me also? Yes. I would be a god. Well, yes, you would be a god. Swamiji had said that. So anyway, I thank also Gouri. Within a short period of time, she managed to guide us for holding this beautiful function, beautiful meeting. I am grateful to the General Secretary Maharaj and his colleagues in the cabinet for asking us to hold this function as part of Azadi ka Amrit Mahotsav. Maybe it has been the government's decision to hold several such functions all over India, and the headquarters might have got some messages for holding such functions. Following that, we just did hold it. I thank you all, the listeners, those who are listening direct and those who are listening online. With these few words, I take leave of you. Thank you.
We'll be taking a very short break, nearly about 5 minutes, and we're coming back with the Dashavatar Gaudiya Nritya, directed by Dr. Mohua Mukherjee and performed by her group. Please bear with us, just a short break. And after that, Gaudiya Nritya of Dashavatar will be having patriotic songs by Calcutta Youth Choir.
Namaskar. Good evening. We are honored and blessed that we have been invited to perform at the feet of Swami Vivekananda. We are grateful to EZCC, Minister of Culture. Our special thanks to Director Srimati Gouri Basu and Ramakrishna Mission Institute of Culture. Our pranam to Suparnananda Maharajji. We are the member of Gaudiya Nritya Bharati, Kolkata, are going to perform Gaudiya Nritya on this auspicious occasion dedicated to Swamiji and 73rd Republic Day and 75th anniversary of India's independence, Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav. Gouri Nritya is an age-old classical dance of Bengal. It is obviously temple dance at the outset. Besides its roots in Natya Shastra, it is again emerged with full glory. Today, on request, we are going to perform Mahajanapada Nritya Dashavatar, written by poet Sri Jayadev, a famous court poet of King Lakshman Sen of 12th century AD. It is based on 10 incarnations of Lord Vishnu, depicting evolution of living world. In Bengal, we have innumerable number of sculptural evidences of Dashavatar from 8th century AD to 18th century AD. Let me introduce the 10 incarnations just briefly, according to our sculpture. Matsya Avatar, the aquatic one. Kurma, the reptile one. Varaha, the mammal. Narasimha, Vamana, the dwarf. Parashurama, with an axe. Rama, Balarama, the irrigation planner. Buddha, symbol of non-violence and knowledge. Kalki. So, we will be going to present Dashavatar and concluded with Shanti Prarthana Nritya from Taittiriya Upanishad. Music, research and rendered by Pandit Amitabh Mukherjee, and the dancers from Gouri Nritya Bharati. After the program, I will introduce my students. Thank you so much.
Hare जगदीश हरे, जय जगदीश हरे, जय जगदीश हरे, जय जगदीश हरे, जय जगदीश हरे। विपुल करे, क्षितिरति विपुल करे, जा किन्ने जिर किन्ने जा किन्ने जिर किन्ने झा, ता किन्ने तिर किन्ने ता किन्ने तिर किन्ने ता, जगे न ता के न, जगे न ता के न, जगे न ताकि न जगे न ताकि न जगे 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 जिन जा जरगने जा जा जरगने जा 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 जरगने शीतिरति विपुल तरे तब तिष्ठति पृष्ठे, धरणी धरण कीन चक्र गिरीष्ठे, धरणी धरण कीन चक्र गिरीष्ठे, केशवाधृत कूर्म शरीर, केशवाधृत कूर्म शरीर, जय जगदीश हरे, जय जगदीश हरे, जय जगदीश हरे। बसति दशन शिखरे धरणी कब लगना, बसति दशन शिखरे धरणी कब लगना, शशि निकलंक कलेवनी मग्ना, शशि निकलंक कलेवनी मग्ना, केशवाधृत शूकर रूप, केशवाधृत शूकर रूप, केशवाधृत शूकर रूप, जय जगदीश हरे, जय जगदीश हरे, जय जगदीश हरे। तब कर कमल वरे नख मद्भुत श्रृंगौ, तब कर कमल वरे नख मद्भुत श्रृंगम, तब कर कमल वरे नख मद्भुत श्रृंगम, ललित हिरण्य कशिपु तनु भृंगौ, ललित हिरण्यकशिपु तनु भृंगौ, ललित हिरण्यकशिपु तनु भृंगौ, केशवाधृत नरहरि रूप, नरहरि रूप, जय जगदीश हरे, 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 जय जगदीश हरे। मेछ निवह निधने कलयसि कलबालौ, मेछ निवह निधने कलयसि कलबालौ, धूमकेतुमिव किमपि करालम्, धूमकेतुमिव किमपि करालौ, धूमकेतुमिव किमपि करालौ, केशवाधृत कल्कि शरीरा, केशवाधृत कल्कि शरीरा, केशवाधृत कल्कि शरीरा। जय जगदीश हरे, जय जगदीश हरे, जय जगदीश हरे, जय जगदीश हरे, जय जगदीश हरे। जय देव कवे हृदमुदित मुतरो, श्री जय देव कवे हृदमुदित मुतरो, श्रीनु सुखदं शुभदं भवसारं, केशवाधृत दशविधरूपा, केशवाधृत दशविधरूपा, केशवाधृत दशविधरूपा, दशविधरूपा, केशवाधृत दशविधरूपा, केशवाधृत दशविधरूपा, केशवाधृत दशविधरूपा, केशवाधृत दशविधरूपा, दशविधरूपा। जय जगदीश हरे, 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 जय जगदीश हरे। वीर्यं करवावहै तेजस्विनावधीतमस्तु मा विद्विषावहै मा विद्विषावहै मा विद्विषावहै। ओम शांति ओम शांति ओम शांति।
On behalf of the Ramakrishna Mission Institute of Culture and Eastern Zonal Cultural Center, we express our deep gratitude to Dr. Mohua Mukherjee and her entire group. I would request her to introduce all the artisans who are present on the stage.
Thank you so much. Let me introduce my students. I'm very grateful once again, EZCC and Ramakrishna Mission Institute of Culture. Shamarpan Sengupta, recipient of Junior National Scholarship from Ministry of Culture on Gouri Nritya. Next, Sridip Karmakar. The third one, Jayanta Biswas, another recipient of Senior National Scholarship on Gouri Nritya. Fourth one, Shomi Bhumi, recipient of Senior National Scholarship and also last year received fellowship from Ministry of Culture on Gouri Nritya. Shomi Bhumi, and also received gold medal on Gouri Nritya from Rabindra Bharati University and North American Bengali Conference. And last one, our son, Mukherjee, recipient of Junior Senior National Scholarship and also fellowship, and also received gold medal from Rabindra Bharati University and North American Bengali Conference. And all the music you have heard, the instruments played by him, the sitar, flute, etc. And lastly, I want to introduce Oren's father. Without him, the Gouri Nritya would be in only theoretical aspect. He has done all the musical research, and the vocal you have heard is by Pandit Amrit Mukherjee. Thank you so much. Namaskar to all.
Ek, dui, tin, char. Jao hoti tin, taketa ta hoti tin, taketa jao hoti tin, taketa tin, takrete taketa jao hoti tin, taketa ta hoti tin, taketa jao hoti tin, taketa tin, takrete taketa. Namaskar.
And again, we would take a very short break to return with the Calcutta choir with some patriotic songs.
নমস্কার, ক্যালকাটা কোয়ারের পক্ষ থেকে রামকৃষ্ণ মিশন ইনস্টিটিউট অফ কালচার এবং ইস্টার্ন জোনাল কালচারাল সেন্টারকে আমাদের অভিনন্দন জানিয়ে আজকে স্বামীজির উদ্দেশ্যে এবং আমাদের ভারতের স্বাধীনতার ৭৫ বর্ষপূর্তির যে অনুষ্ঠান সারা ভারতবর্ষব্যাপী চলছে তাকে উদ্দেশ্য করে আমরা আমাদের প্রথম গানটি নিবেদন করছি। भारत माता बुद्ध जन गीता।
में सदा सब पद युगलम् धनस्थित धनस्थिति सतत चिन्तनम् वंसि में सदा तव पद युगलम् सरस्मित सरस्मिति सतत चिन्तनम् भावनादय कालमेलनम् जय भारत जननी 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 जय भारत
অনেক ধন্যবাদ। এই আপনাদের এই ইনস্টিটিউট অফ কালচারে এইখানে একটা সময় বেশ কয়েকবার আসার আমার সৌভাগ্য হয়েছিল। তখন আমার মনে আছে তরুণ মহারাজ ছিলেন এখানে। তা আমাকে দিয়ে একটা খুব বড় কাজ করানো হয়েছিল এখানকার। সেটা হলো স্বামীজির কিছু বাণী সম্বলিত বই, যে স্বামীজি কা ভারত, সেইটা হিন্দিতে ট্রান্সলেট করেন সাউথের এক ভদ্রলোক, আমি নামটা এই মুহূর্তে মনে করতে পারছি না। হরিহরনজি এবং বাণী জয়রামকে দিয়ে গানগুলো গাইয়েছিলাম। তার দুটি কলি আপনাদের শোনাচ্ছি, মানে না শুনিয়ে পাচ্ছি না। এই মাইকটা একটু বাড়ানো যাবে? तेरे आँखों से आंसू बहे कहाँ छुपावे लाज, तेरे दिल में दुख भरे तो दिन में जागे साँझ, इस मिट्टी पर सबसे गुणा है नारी का अपमान, देश का कल्याण चाहते हो तो नारी को दो सम्मान, तू ही जननी तू ही शक्ति
देवी प्यारी माई,
ओ तू ही जननी तू ही शक्ति तू ही देवी प्यारी माई, घर घर में तू मंगलमयी, तू हो शांति दायी,
तू ही जननी तू ही शक्ति तू ही देवी प्यारी माई।
पंछी जैसे उड़ न पावे एक पंख के सहारे, देश कभी ना बढ़ पावेगा नारी को पावे इस मिट्टी पर सबसे बुरा है नारी का अपमान। चाहते हो नारी को तो सम्मान।
तू ही जननी तू ही शक्ति तू ही जननी तू ही शक्ति
একটা ডানায় কখনো পাখি উড়তে পারে না। দেশকে স্বামীজি বর্ণনা করলেন যে তার যে একটি পাখির মতো, তার দুটি ডানা, একটি ডানা পুরুষ একটি ডানা নারী। কাজে নারীকে বাদ দিয়ে যদি দেশের উন্নতির কথা ভাবি সেটা একটা দিবা স্বপ্ন ছাড়া কিছুই না। নারীকে সম্মান করতে না পারলে তাতে এটা মুখের কথাই থেকে যায়। তা এই গানগুলো আমাদের রক্তের সঙ্গে মিশে আছে। আরেকটি গান আমার পরিবেশন করছি, আপনাদের প্রত্যেকের চেনা গান। খুব ভালো লাগবে যদি আপনারাও একটু আমাদের সঙ্গে কণ্ঠ মেলান। আজকাল সব লোকে বলে না যে খুব জনপ্রিয় গান, মেগা হিট গান, সুপার হিট গান। আমার তো মনে হয় এর থেকে জনপ্রিয় গান আমার অন্তত জানা নেই। ধনধান্য পুষ্পে ভরা, ধনধান্য পুষ্প ভরার মতো এরম একটা সত্যিকারের যদি জনপ্রিয় গান বলা যায় তাহলে বোধহয় এই গানটির কথাই বলতে হয়। যখন চোখ মেলেছি, গান গাইতে শিখেছি প্রথম 4-5 বছর বয়সে, তখন বাবা যখন এই গানটি তুলিয়েছেন তখন যে ভালোবাসা ছিল গানটির প্রতি, এখন সেই ভালোবাসাটা বেড়েছে, একটুও কমেনি। এবং ঘটনা যে এই সমস্ত গানের মৃত্যু নেই, এই সমস্ত গানে কোনো এক্সপায়ারি ডেট লেখা নেই, যেটা আমাদের কম্পোজিশনে থাকে এক্সপায়ারি ডেট লেখা থাকে। এই গানগুলোর কোনো এক্সপায়ারি ডেট থাকে না। এবং যতদিন ভারতবর্ষ থাকবে, যতদিন আমাদের মধ্যে চেতনা থাকবে দেশকে ভালোবাসার, ততদিন এই গানের সম্মান প্রাপ্তি সব কিছুই থাকবে। আসুন সকল মিলে সুর করব, ধনধান্য পুষ্পমালা। One, two.
Oh
অনেক ধন্যবাদ যারা আমাদের সঙ্গে কণ্ঠ মেলালেন তাদের। আরেকটি গান গাইতে ইচ্ছে করছে আজকের দিনে, বিশেষ করে আমাদের স্বাধীনতা তো অনেক অনেক মানুষের রক্তে রাঙানো এই স্বাধীনতা, তাদেরকে মাথায় রেখে একটি গান আপনাদের সামনে রাখছি, মুক্তির মন্দির সোপানো তলে। গানটি লিখেছিলেন মোহিনী চৌধুরী এবং সুর করেছিলেন, খুব আশ্চর্যের ব্যাপার, কৃষ্ণচন্দ্র দে। এটা অনেকেরই অজানা তথ্য। সেই গানটি আমাদের এবারের উপস্থাপনা। আবার চাইবো আপনারা আমাদের সঙ্গে কণ্ঠ মেলান।
Thank you.
ধন্যবাদ। আরেকটি গান গাইতে ইচ্ছে করছে, এটিও আপনাদের পরিচিত গান, আপনারা জানেন আমি একদম নিশ্চিত। কদম কদম বাড়ায়ে যা, নেতাজি রায়েনের গান। আসুন সকলে একসঙ্গে গাই।
के गीत गाए जा, जिंदगी है कौम की तो कौम पे लुटाए जा, कदम कदम बढ़ाए जा, खुशी के गीत गाए जा, जिंदगी है कौम की तो कौम पे लुटाए जा, कदम कदम बढ़ाए जा। कदम बढ़ाए जा, कदम कदम बढ़ाए जा, खुशी के गीत गाए जा, जिंदगी है कौम की तो कौम पे लुटाए जा, कदम कदम बढ़ाए जा। तेरी हिम्मत बढ़ती रहे, खुदा तेरी सुधा रहे, तेरी हिम्मत बढ़ती रहे, खुदा तेरी सुधा रहे, तो सामने तेरे आए उठाक में मिलाए जा, कदम कदम बढ़ाए जा, खुशी के गीत गाए जा, जिंदगी है कौम की तो कौम पे लुटाए जा, कदम कदम बढ़ाए जा। संभाल के चलो दिल्ली पुकार के, कोई निशान संभाल के, काल के लेते गाड़ के, लहराए जा लहराए जा, कदम कदम बढ़ाए जा, खुशी के गीत गाए जा, जिंदगी है कौम की तो कौम पे लुटाए जा, कदम कदम बढ़ाए जा, खुशी के गीत गाए जा, जिंदगी है कौम की तो कौम पे लुटाए जा, कदम कदम बढ़ाए जा, कदम कदम बढ़ाए जा, कदम कदम बढ़ाए जा।
অনেক ধন্যবাদ। আর একজনের কথা আজ খুব মনে পড়ছে, মানুষটি চারণ কবি মুকুন্দ দাস। সমস্ত বাংলা জুড়ে গান গেয়ে মানুষকে একেবারে খেপিয়ে তুলেছিলেন ইংরেজদের বিরুদ্ধে। অথচ মজার কথা হলো যে তিনি কিন্তু গাইতেন একটি কীর্তনের দলে। বরিশালের অশ্বিনী দত্তের সংস্পর্শে এসে তার একটা অদ্ভুত সংযোগ সৃষ্টি হয় এই বিপ্লবী যে ঘরানা তার প্রতি, এবং অসংখ্য গান রচনা করেছেন। এখন যে গানটি গাইছি একটু অপেরা ধর্মী গান, আমাদের বাংলার যাত্রার আঙ্গিকে তৈরি। ভয় কি মরণে রাখিতে সন্তানে। দেখুন
সন্তানে মাতঙ্গি মেতেছে আর সমর রঙে। ভয় কি মরণে দানবদলনি ভয় উন্মাদিনী আর কি দানব থাকিবে বঙ্গে। দানবদলনি ভয় উন্মাদিনী আর কি দানব থাকিবে বঙ্গে। সাজরে সন্তান হিন্দু মুসলমান, সাজরে সন্তান হিন্দু মুসলমান, তাকে থাকিবে প্রাণ না হয় গাইবে প্রাণ। লইয়ে কৃপান ও হে আগুয়ান, লইয়ে কৃপান ও হে আগুয়ান, দিতে হয় মুকুন্দের নিয়োগ সঙ্গে। ভয় কি মরণে রাখিতে সন্তানে মাতঙ্গি মেতেছে আর সমর রঙে। ভয় কি মরণে দানবদলনি ভয় উন্মাদিনী আর কি দানব থাকিবে বঙ্গে। দানবদলনি ভয় উন্মাদিনী আর কি দানব থাকিবে বঙ্গে। সাজরে সন্তান হিন্দু মুসলমান, সাজরে সন্তান হিন্দু মুসলমান, তাকে থাকিবে প্রাণ না হয় যাইবে প্রাণ। লইয়ে কৃপান ও হে আগুয়ান, লইয়ে কৃপান ও হে আগুয়ান, নিতে হয় মুকুন্দের নিয়োগ সঙ্গে। ভয় কি মরণে রাখিতে সন্তানে মাতঙ্গি মেতেছে আর সমর রঙে। ভয় কি মরণে রাখিতে সন্তানে মাতঙ্গি মেতেছে আর সমর রঙে। তাতই তাতই তৈ ধিমি ধিমি দম দম, তাতই তাতই তৈ ধিমি ধিমি দম দম, ভূত পিশাচ নাচে রোগিণী সঙ্গে। ভয় কি মরণে রাখিতে সন্তানে মাতঙ্গি মেতেছে আর সমর রঙে। ভয় কি মরণে, ভয় কি মরণে, ভয় কি মরণে।
শেষ করি নাকি? আচ্ছা শেষ গানের একটা করছি। আচ্ছা আচ্ছা না করলাম তো একটা এটার ইয়ের। আচ্ছা এটা অন্যরকম। চল চল One, two, three, four.
सारे जहां से अच्छा हिंदुस्ता हमारा, सारे जहां से अच्छा हिंदुस्ता हमारा। हम बुलबुले मालवा हमारा हमारा सारे जहां से अच्छा हिंदोस्तां हमारा सारे जहां से अच्छा मजहब नहीं सिखाता आपस में बैर रखना मजहब नहीं सिखाता आपस में बैर रखना हिंदी है हम हिंदी है हम हिंदी है हम वतन है हिंदोस्तां हमारा हमारा सारे जहां से अच्छा हिंदोस्तां हमारा सारे जहां से अच्छा हिंदोस्तां हमारा हम बुलबुले हैं इसकी ये गुलसितां हमारा हमारा सारे जहां से अच्छा हिंदोस्तां हमारा हिंदोस्तां हमारा हिंदोस्तां
নমস্কার, বিদায় নিচ্ছি। খুব ভালো লাগলো এই সময়ের মধ্যে আপনারা আমাদের পাশে থেকে যেভাবে আমাদের উজ্জীবিত করলেন, আমরা সত্যি কৃতজ্ঞ রইলাম আপনাদের কাছে। নমস্কার। একটা এটা হওয়া উচিত, দয়া করে বেরিয়ে যাবেন না। আমরা জনগণ মনটা দিয়ে অন্তত শেষ করি সকলে দাঁড়িয়ে উঠে। জনগণ মন অধিনায়ক জয় হে ভারত ভাগ্য বিধাতা পঞ্জাব সিন্ধু গুজরাট মারাঠা দ্রাবিড় উৎকল বঙ্গ বিন্দ হিমাচল যমুনা গঙ্গা উচ্চল জলধি তরঙ্গ তব শুভ নামে জাগে তব শুভ আশিস মাগে গাহে তব জয়